All right. Okay, Barbara, we're live.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Barbara Peters. This is the Poison Pen in Scottsdale, Arizona. We have with us David Baldacci, author of Dreamtown, in an undisclosed location, but probably, well, I don't know, somewhere in Virginia. And Don Winslow, in another undisclosed location, probably somewhere in California. Anyway, how exciting to bring these two giants together. And before we talk about David's book, Dreamtown, and our autographed copies will be arriving tomorrow, fresh from David's hand, for which we really thank you, David. I'd like to say that Don will be live at the Poison Pen on Monday night to kick off his book called City of Fire. So a double dose of Winslow for the end of April. I mean, what could be better than that? Except, of course, seeing David maybe 3 times this year, David? Is it 3?
Yes, 3.
So how do you find the energy to do like a spare book?
COVID changed the whole world for everybody. I think the only silver lining for me was all my travel was canceled. I just sat home and I could either, look at the news every day and read every newspaper article, which I did anyway, and then slip my wrists, or I could dive into writing books. And so the books were a catharsis. Books were my safe spot. And I spent a lot more time with them than I ordinarily would, just to get away from the real world.
Well, it's certainly been a boon to your readers. And I always look at the front of your book and it keeps growing. You have this amazing list of books under many, many different headings for an internationally best-selling author.
Yeah, almost on page 2 now.
No kidding. It's going to require extra end papers. And Winslow, you're working your way in that direction too.
Oh, yeah.
So, I mean, this is Don Winslow's program, but I would like to say that Dreamtown, last year, David and Jake Tapper appeared together. And in Jake's book, Dance with the Devil, we were flirting around with Hollywood. And actually, weren't we in Palm Springs, David? Wasn't that part of it?
Yeah, in Jake's book, absolutely, yes.
Yeah. And there was a lot of 1950s Hollywood history. I realized to my horror, and I will see it again tonight, that I actually lived through it. I mean, I was a teenager in the 1950s. So you guys are doing historical research, and I'm going, wait, this was my life. So I'm going to listen to this and try to reimagine myself as like a dazzled 12-year-old instead of getting there through the pages of the book. So, Mr. Winslow, over to you.
Madam, thank you. Always great to see you, Barbara, and you, Patrick, and always great to be at Poisoned Pen, even remotely. I'm looking forward to getting there next week. It's everybody's home, I think, Poisoned Pen, and you guys do this so great. And I'm honored and flattered to be asked to host this for David Baldacci, the great David Baldacci, and Dreamtown. David, I love this book, man. You don't need me to tell you well done, but well done. It's a page turner in more than the usual sense. And this is what I mean by that. It's a page turner in the traditional sense of, boy, you want to know what happens, right? You've got to find out. It's suspenseful. But it was for me a page turner in the sense that I was loving the writing so much, that I just wanted to read more. I was trying to, discipline myself and ration myself, because it's busy times right now with a book coming out. And I thought, well, let me read a chapter of Dreamtown. Okay, one more. Yeah, okay, one more. Because it's just so enjoyable and well written. So congratulations on another terrific book.
Well, thank you. It's high praise coming from you. I appreciate that very much.
Indeed. A toast to you both, in point of fact.
Yeah. So Aloysius Archer, how did he arrive in your head?
I've always loved crime noir. I started reading Dashiell Hammett and went to Raymond Chandler, and then moved on to James Ellroy, and then sort of hit the jackpot with Ross MacDonald and his new Archer character. And they're all great writers. I just felt like MacDonald took it to another level, psychologically and emotionally. But where Archer came from, I was on book tour pre-COVID. I was in Toronto, Canada. I'd finished my work for the day. It was the middle of a snowstorm. I was staring out the window at a wall of white. I don't sleep well on the road. And I thought, I've been thinking about crime noir. I'm going to write a short story with this guy named Aloysius Archer set in the late 40s. He's going to be an ex-war veteran, ex-con, and I'm going to see where he goes. And I thought it was going to be like maybe a 30, 40 page short story. What the hell I was going to do with that, who knows? There's no short story market anymore.
Right. Yeah.
But I just wanted to play around with it. And, a few months later, I had a novel. I was just that much into the material. I'm a history buff. I love that time period. It was a transition of America. We were sick of being poor. We were sick of the Depression. We were sick of fighting a war. We were sick of sacrificing. People wanted to have fun. They wanted to have prosperity. A lot of them pulled up their roots. They went west, where all the streets were paved with gold and all the women looked like Rita Hayworth. And it was booming in California back then. I mean, they built planes and cars and everything back there. And then you had Hollywood. But I knew that eventually Archer would get to the West Coast. I wanted him to be a PI, but he needed to have a few years under his belt. I wasn't going to thrust him into, if I put him in a Dreamtown as a newbie, he wouldn't have survived 10 pages. So we had to have a little meat under him. And that's was sort of the idea. This is going to be a cycle. This is going to be a series. And he was going to grow with each book and get a little more, weight under him, a little more gravitas. But it was just writing about an era that I just find completely fascinating, because when you have prosperity, as you well know in the books you write, wherever the money goes, the criminals go. It's like this is where you're supposed to go. And then you have the added bonus of exploiting really famous people too, which is a whole nother industry into itself.
Yeah, I want to come back to that. But you talk about a series. You once said, in terms of series fiction, it's a sprint, it's not a sprint, it's a marathon.
Yeah, you just have to really understand that you have to fight the urge to put that mortar tap on full blast and let everything pour out. And I wrote screenplays for a while, not with much success, but I did learn about foreshadowing and payoff. And so with series books, I try to build a character with a big backstory. They have a lot of issues, a lot of problems, maybe unrelated to what they're going to be doing in the plot. And that is material to be mined in future books. So you will chip away a little bit each book, leaving more material to do the same with in future books. Nobody wants to know everything about this person right away. And there's a mystery to it. There's a tension building to that. So that's what I like to do. It's like carving out a statue. You're not going to do it overnight. And when you have a series in mind, you want to have some material, some baggage that you can build on with each book and expose and reveal with each book. And then slowly, it's like getting to know a person over a lifetime. You meet a stranger, and 50 years later, you're longtime friends. But there was a lot of complications in between that time period where you slowly learned about each other. And that's what I try to do, at least with a series.
Yeah, and do it beautifully. Let's go back to that era. I also am fascinated by that post-World War II era and post-World War II literature. It was the birth time of my beloved bebop jazz, which I still listen to all the time. This book is so brilliantly evocative of that era, particularly in its physical settings. How did you go about that? I mean, you can get on a plane, you can't get in a time machine, right? So how did you do it?
So my older brother is an artist, and that era was the only time period that he really cared about. I've seen more pictures of Rita Hayworth and Marilyn Monroe and Sophia Loren than anybody on earth, except for my brother. So I was steeped in the golden era of Hollywood from the 40s up to the late 1950s. But I had to do some innovative research with this. Like, I went on Etsy. I pulled this out. I went on Etsy and I found a street map of Los Angeles from 1953 on Etsy, pre-freeway, and so I had my magnifying glass. And I'm going through this because this is the route and stuff Archer's going to have to deal with. I went on YouTube and I just did a search on YouTube, and I found a guy who in 1953 took a 27-minute video of himself going down the strip in Las Vegas.
Oh, great.
So
yeah.
I went frame by frame, taking notes along the way, and that helped me on the piece that took place in Vegas. But I read a lot of books. I talked to people who lived back in that time period. I looked at old newspaper articles, crime reports, everything you can. And then, as you know, Don, you do this brilliantly. You amass all this research, and you have to leave most of it out because you're not writing a textbook. And then you have to take the time to put it in pieces. I opened the book with Archer coming through LA. Why did I do that? Because I just wanted to show, okay, this is his world right now. So I wanted to show you some of the cool stuff and some of the not so cool stuff on his way to pick up Liberty for their date. But that sort of set the tone. I wanted to let people know right away, you're not in 2022. You're in New Year's Eve, 1952, and I'm showing you why. And then hold on, and the ride's going to get a little steeper after that.
Yeah, boy, it sure worked. You describe Hollywood as a meat grinder.
Why?
I actually know why, but tell me why you think so.
I know you know why. Well, it's the place where you can. It's the place where you go to get famous, and then it's the place where you go to get pushed off the top of the mountain. Because nobody is famous forever. I kind of looked at this in cycles. You'll have a star that comes out and they're super hot and they're in like 7 or 8 different incredibly successful movies over a 2 to 3 to 4 year time period, and then they disappear. And you don't know what happened to them. Well, they were replaced by another crop of people that comes up, and now they're the hot thing. They're the it girl, the it guy. And it's really hard to sustain a career, particularly if you're a woman of a certain age, to sustain a career over a long period of time out there. So it is the place where you go to get famous for, maybe a slightly longer than 15 seconds. But the other side of it is that it is the longest fall any human being will ever take, because they have known the very top, and everybody is, shouting their name. I imagine when the Beatles came over in the 60s, and the entire United States went nuts for these people, this group, for a fairly long time. And then eventually another group came that people like more, and people move on. People are fickle. So that's why it's a meat grinder, and I also put in the little anecdote about the actress who climbed up on the letter H and jumped off, because she didn't even get to the top of the mountain, but the town beat her finally.
Yeah, it's a very telling moment in the book. I want to go backwards quite a ways. You and I have something, and we have a lot of things in common. We have something else in common besides obviously great hair, and I don't know why okay. You were a reader as a kid of Sherlock Holmes, yes?
Yes, very much so.
That was a big influence on me, but tell me about you and A. Conan Doyle.
So I still remember the first story I ever read. It was in a Reader's Digest condensed book, and it was the Blue Carbuncle. And I read it, and I finished it going, geez, I really hope he's written something else. Because I was like in ninth grade. I had no idea who Conan Doyle was, but it was just mesmerizing to me. So I've read every story 1,000 times. I've watched every iteration of every movie. I took my kids to London when they were younger, and we went to the Sherlock Holmes Museum, and they had these dioramas in there of different scenes from the book with no labels on them. And I could tell the kids every diorama what story it was from just by looking at the characterizations and sort of all of that. But Doyle was, since these were short stories and short novels, economy of words, that really is something that's always hammered home for me. If you can say it in 100 words, you can say it better in 20. And you could say even better in 10. It takes more work, but the product is a lot better. And just his ability to create really great characters in a short amount of page space. It wasn't like there was a huge buildup with Watson and Holmes, but you got to know them almost immediately because he took time, but every word counted. I always talk about the Gettysburg Address, the most brilliant political speech ever given in this country. It's only 363 words long. It took Lincoln 2.5 minutes to speak it. The guy who spoke before him was a congressman. He spoke for 2.5 hours. Nobody remembers him or that speech, but every word in that speech counted. I think, we owe our readers that we will take the time and the energy to make every word count and the story as sharp as it can be.
The way I think about it is, that every word in my house has to either pay rent or at least do the dishes, but they have to do something. So you're in ninth grade, you're reading Sherlock Holmes and loving it. Is it at that point you think, boy, this might be something I want to do?
Yeah, I was one of those kids. I grew up in Richmond, Virginia, in a time period the city was heavily segregated, and I was there was nothing for us to do. There were no games inside the house. We were just that generation. We were just thrown outside and told to go play and show back up at dinner time or sometime. And I was the kid in the neighborhood who loved to choreograph all the action we were going to do. The battles we were going to fight, the journeys we were going to go on. Everybody had their role. And I would constantly be talking about these stories and stuff. And my mom gave me a journal when I was a little kid and, said, why don't you start writing some of this stuff down, because you talk a lot. And I started writing it down, and my mother came, years later after I was successful with my mom. I went back to my mom and said, thank you. It was such a gift to change my whole life with that little notebook. And, she said, well, I just wanted to shut you the hell up. I mean, because I couldn't take it anymore. As they say in the South, son, you'd gotten on my last nerve. There's a difference between wanting to be a writer and actually being a writer. Lots of people feel like they have a story inside of them, they have a book inside of them. But whenever anybody comes up to me and say, yeah, I know I've got a book inside of me, if I only had time to write it, that I know that they're probably never going to do it because writers who really are meant to be writers will find the time to do it
Yeah.
because they can't not do it. They have to do it because it's
Right.
such a part of them. So that's really, but I started out with short stories. I wrote short stories for about 15 years. They're a great way to sort of learn the craft, even though they're short. You have to have characters and dialogue and plot and narrative and all that. But you have you don't have excess pages to fudge and be lazy. Everything has to count in 6, 10, 15 pages. So, I wrote those for years. I moved on to writing some teleplays and some screenplays and novella and then novels. And so it was a long arc for me. I never thought that I was just going to write a novel over the weekend and sell the film rights on Monday and retire from the practice of law. I knew it was going to be a long, hard road, and I expected it to be, and it was.
Yeah. Yeah. Agatha Christie, another influence. True.
She absolutely. And she was, she's written some of the most memorable characters of all time, Hercule Poirot, Tuppence, Jane Marple. And her forte, her strength was plot. And she may not have been a smoother writer as some of the others in that genre, but her plots really crackled, and the whodunits were just, and that, as you know, in crime novels, I remember somebody asked John Updike one time, how come have you never written a crime novel? And Updike, I don't know if this is apocryphal or not. I hope that it's true. And supposedly Updike said, I'm not smart enough to write a crime novel, because a crime novel has to have all the elements of a traditional novel. And then overlaid on top of it, you have to have this puzzle piece, this criminal element, this chase, this tension, this race against time, two people or forces battling it out, clues laid, clues solved, and all that traditional novels don't have to have. So it's almost like two novels in one. And I love that puzzle piece. I was a trial lawyer for a decade, and trials for me were puzzles that you had to break down and reassemble and put back together and come up with an entirely different conclusion based on the same set of facts as the other side on the trial had, which is quite something to do. So the puzzle piece really attracted me.
Yeah, I always thought of trials because I advised attorneys getting ready for trial, and always viewed it as a battle of competing stories.
It was.
I often thought a lot of times that the trial was decided on opening statement, that it could be over by that point.
I always told people that you give a jury too much to think about at your peril. I said all they need is one coat peg to hang their coat on, just one. And if you hit that and continue to pound it, simple is better, particularly in a trial.
Yeah, I sometimes refer to lawyer's disease when somebody has to make every point that they know and jam it in,
Yeah, bad idea.
Bad idea. Hey, David, why can't people just sit and read books and be nice to each other?
Yeah. Well, I've followed you on Twitter, and it's just, we're at the precipice. Maybe we're over the precipice already. I don't know. I do know that people who read books, lots of different books, are more tolerant, less prejudiced, more open to changing their minds on things, more sympathetic, more empathetic. Books truly are a gateway to a more civilized society. That's what they're sort of meant to do. They're meant to enthrall and inform and all that stuff. They're also supposed to make us more civilized as well. And we can have differences of opinion on the page or spoken. We don't have to throw fists or pull out guns. And I kind of look at today's world, and you see readers and non-readers, and it's a very stark divide. I think even more so than it used to be. But I tell you what, if we could get books, instead of banning books, we should be giving them out to free to everybody, everywhere, all the time. And because I want to live in a world where people pick up these every day and read them and enjoy them and think about them and talk to people about them, and don't scream at people and come up with things that aren't facts and they're accepted as truths. And books can do all of those things, but I don't know where we are with those right now. I wish people could sit and read books and be nice to each other, but we're a long way from that right now.
We are.
It's a reactionary time, guys. I said at the beginning that I lived through the period that you're writing about here, but I lived through McCarthy in real time and saw the incredible turn that this country took. When all that was going on, and we've gone through stages like that of, virulent populism, or, some guy who wants to be king,
Yeah.
It's
It's the old
it's
playbook.
kind of a
I mean,
cycle that we go
Yeah.
through. But
Yeah.
I also think that people who read books are better able to do complex thinking. And particularly if you read crime or mystery, you are prepared for things not to be on the surface. I mean, not to be as they are on the surface, but you're looking for, a more complex answer. You're looking for a twist. It's not this simple stuff that is being fed to people where they don't, just accept it at face value and don't bother to consider that there might be more to it.
Yeah, I mean, as a lawyer, I always assumed everybody was lying to me, even my own clients. So that just
Yeah.
made me want to go out and, corroborate things 12 different ways. So I always look for as many different sources as I can. Relying on one source to me is the epitome of stupidity. I mean, it's just going to set you up, as a lawyer, if you do that and you're going to go in and get your ass kicked in court, but if you do that in life, you're going to get your ass kicked in life too. We have a brain for a reason, to use it to go out there and make sure that what we're actually saying is actually factual, and accepting it, because if somebody you don't even know online and you don't even know who this person really is, and they say something and you go like, oh, that sounds like it's true to me, and then you start repeating it, where in the world does the brain come in on that?
But isn't it the difference between reading books or reading journalism and watching it on TV is that with the book or the printed page, you have a chance to reconsider. You have a chance to be critical, and go back and go, oh, read that again. What was I reading?
Yeah, in a movie or television, really, you're getting a director's version of what the story is supposed to be. Heightened by and embellished by whatever the actor's performances are like, but you don't really get a do-over unless you go back and watch the movie 10 times. With a book, you can read 10 pages and then read another 10 pages and then go back to the beginning and read that again quite easily, and maybe come away with a different conclusion because of the second 10 pages, because you might have had a false impression. It does train the mind to think about things and question its own veracity. Lots of people make, misassumptions based on something they read for the first time. Again, as a lawyer, everything I read, I would read at least 3 times, once to just get a feeling, 2 to dig into more of the facts, and 3 to make sure that what I was getting out of it was actually accurate or not. And that's just what we have our brain for. It's built for that stuff.
Yeah, but that's the difference between reading and watching. It's Marshall McLuhan. Reading is a solipsist or solitary act, whereas
Yes.
watching, is more of a group kind of a thing, and doesn't allow you to form your own opinion. You're under pressure. If you go to the movies, you tend to laugh, they have audiences on television with canned laughter, the whole bit.
Right.
So
No,
it's a very different intellectual experience, I think.
Yeah, books are very participatory. You're part of it. A book, I tell readers, I wrote this book, gave it to you. It's not finished until you read it.
Mm-hmm.
Every reader is the same thing. So every reader is going to get, I give them a template, and they get 100 people to read the same book, one of our books, and come up with 100 different ideas of what the book's supposed to be about. And I think that's a cool thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I do too. So let me ask this question, because it was asked of me recently. I wrote an essay for an Italian newspaper about this. Is crime fiction literature, or does it matter? David?
I would say that crime fiction is literature, and it also doesn't matter what you call it.
Mm-hmm.
People refer to us as crime writers. Overseas it's crime fiction. Here it's thrillers or mystery, whatever you want to call it. I never wanted to be put into a box with a label on it. When people ask me, what do you write? I say I just write what I want to write. And you can call it a mystery or thriller or crime fiction or commercial fiction, literary fiction. I don't really care. That you have every right to call it whatever you want. But when I'm sitting down to write a novel, I don't necessarily think that, I'm writing a thriller today or a mystery today, or I'm writing something that's more commercial fiction, whatever that might be. Or no, I want to write something, more literary, which means maybe I go and look at my thesaurus a few more times and throw in a few words that I wouldn't use. But at the end of the day, the most important thing is the story, And so when people say, what do you do for a living? I say, I tell stories. That's what I do.
Do you think there's a difference between story and plot?
I think plot is an element of story. And I think in some instances, the plot is the story. In other instances, the plot is an adjunct to the character in a story. I think the best books, there's a balance. And if you want to overweight the character a little bit more than the plot, I think that's not a bad thing, because if you want to connect, on a human level with the reader, you're not going to do it necessarily that well with a plot. You will do it with a human being who's trying to survive the plot you put them into, where they care about that person. So I try to have a balanced view to that. I want them to know the characters, and I want them to either root for them or against them, or maybe be ambivalent one way or the other, depending on the character. But I want them to feel something. And then I build this plot for them to run this gauntlet of what I want them to go through. When they get out at the end, maybe they live, maybe they die, maybe they're scathed or unscathed. So I think the plot is certainly an element. It would be almost impossible for me to think of writing a story where it would be all plot and no character, because I'm not sure what the point would be.
Yeah. Let me be rude and quote you to yourself. Okay.
Okay. Yeah.
I hate it when people do it to me, but that's not going to stop me.
Feel free.
Okay. Here's something you once said in an interview that really struck me, and I'd love for you to expand upon it for the audience. Writing is a craft, and we are all apprentices for life.
I'm never going to master this thing, no matter how good I think I am. I spent some time with William Goldman when we were working on a film together, my first book, and I spent a couple of days with him in Virginia. And here was a guy who's he achieved every award you could possibly see. The guy was a legend, and so we got to talking about writing, and he said, "You know what my greatest fear is?" And I said, "No." He said, "My greatest fear is I'm going to wake up one day and everybody's going to realize I have no idea what the hell I'm doing." And so for me, writing a novel, writing anything is so different than a lot of other occupations. Most other jobs, you get really good at something by doing the same thing over and over again. So you get all the errors and mistakes and tweak it. I wouldn't want to be on a plane with a pilot says, I've flown this sucker the same way for 30 years. Today, I'm going to try something different. Hang on.
Right. Yeah.
But when you're writing a story, I felt, and when I talked to Bill Goldman about this, it's so good and so refreshing and so important and critical to get yourself out of your comfort zone and take on challenges you didn't think you were capable of. You don't want to become a factory where you're like, you ask yourself, I have a new book to do. What am I going to do? Well, how did I do it last time? And then I just changed the names, and that's easy to do. And you could still make a good living doing that. But I got into this just to challenge myself and to see what I was capable of. And so I write a lot of different series, primarily so that I'm not going to repeat myself. I have to create brand new characters all the time and put them into places I haven't been to or gone to, and in plots that I really had never imagined doing before. So I think that's what I say. It's just a never-ending craft. You're going to find elements. I don't care how long you've been writing. You're going to find elements that stun the crap out of you. You're going to scare yourself because, I built this plot and I don't think I can make it work. What's happening? I've been doing this a long time and I can't make this work. That's not a bad situation to be in, because it shows you trying and you're trying to get there, and you're respecting it for what it is, which is this, indomitable beast thing that you've got this motor inside of you. You have to do it, but you're never going to be able to control it fully. And so what? That's cool.
Yeah, I always tell aspiring writers, it's not like we have a kid on the emergency room operating table. No one's going to die if we screw up a passive verb form or something. We can go back and fix it and work on it. Is it true, sir, that you take showers to cure writer's block?
Yeah, it is true that I do that. I do. I don't know what it is, the water. I go for swims and I go paddleboarding, and if it's in the summer and it's warm. Writer's block is just another way of saying it's just another element of working on the book. Sometimes if I'm working on another writing project at the same time, I will just leave that book and go work on something else, and it frees up part of your subconscious to think about it. And I did the same thing when I was a lawyer. I don't think it was shower so much, but I would just go off and do something else, because if I focused on it too much, I would overthink it and I'd never get to the resolution of the issue. But if I freed my mind up and I was thinking about something else, all of a sudden out of the subconscious, it floated to the surface, and bang, I've got where I need to go. And I think every writer, doesn't have to be a shower or a walk or a swim, but they have to have a process where they can sort of get away from the material for a little bit, go do something else, recharge, and let a part of their brain focus on it. And 9 times out of 10, I think, the resolution will come.
Yeah. Let's get back to Dreamtown for a minute. Now, hold it up again for the audience. Great book. With Archer and with books like Dreamtown, and you mentioned these guys earlier. You mentioned Chandler, and you mentioned especially Ross MacDonald. You're really stepping onto that turf, and you do it beautifully, just beautifully. Is that at all intimidating, though?
Oh, my
Or
God.
was it?
Yeah, absolutely intimidating. And while I was writing the Archer series, I would go back and reread some of the novels from these other writers,
Mm-hmm.
particularly MacDonald. He wrote almost 20 Lou Archer novels.
Mm-hmm.
It took him from the 40s into the 70s.
Right.
And you see the growth in the cycle of the character and the evolution of that arc vividly. So yes, it was really intimidating. But look, if you're gonna dive into something like this, I tell people don't go buy a self-help book. Just go read these guys, these masters who have done it.
Yes.
Right. And just go pull them off the shelf and pick it up. And these guys they know what they're doing. They've done it. They're the real deal. So it was quite intimidating. But again, it was that sort of electric charge. I never thought to myself, hey, I'm going to write a book as good as Ross MacDonald. I don't see it that way. What I want to do is I'm intrigued with this time period. I love crime noir. I love those books. And I just want a little piece of it for me as well. Mm-hmm. And I want to see what I can do. And that's what I try to do with these novels.
Yeah, and you sure did. You sure grabbed a piece of it. I had a chance to go to Raymond Chandler's house. And it was like going to church, standing in the room where he wrote The Long Goodbye, and bullet holes still in the walls where he shot at his wife, And
he had some issues.
I was in awe.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And, he had quite a life. People, he, started out, he was an executive. He worked in an oil company. He had obviously a big drinking problem. But a command of language and a knowledge of the city that he wrote about, which was, he got right into the bones of it. And the same with MacDonald. They got into the bones of the place. At the end of the day, when you finish books by either of those writers, the locations are as big a characters as any of the people walking through those novels. They are. And vividly, that entire world. And that is so cool. And it is so hard to do. But if you can nail it, it's a sweet result. And you can feel good about yourself for like 5 seconds, and then it's off to the next one.
Yeah, I think you can feel good for longer than that. I mean, the settings in this book are marvelous and so evocative. And that comes from a guy who loves this tradition, loves those books, I do, though, have a good time taunting my LA friends that, Chandler wrote his great LA novels in San Diego.
Might have been cheaper rent down there.
Cheaper rent, and it's better, as a San Diego guy, we have this chip on our shoulder about our big brother in LA. And so I had to get that in there. But the settings in this book are just terrific, and I really appreciated them. All right, I'm going to go back to being rude and quote you to yourself. Okay. I loved this line, and because I believe it says so much about crime fiction. And here it is. Old sins cast long shadows. Do you remember writing that? And could you elucidate that a little bit for us?
Yeah. There's no greater compulsion to harm someone or to do something bad to another person than anger built up over time. And, they say revenge is the dish best eaten cold. Decisions that people make in the past, whether intentional or not, and whether it might, I learned in my life, particularly when I was a lawyer, human beings can rationalize any behavior, any behavior that, they can make sense of it to themselves, even if it's just horrible. But when you make a decision in the past that has an effect over other people, those decisions tend to snowball and bring other people into it. It's almost like rolling downhill, and it gets bigger and bigger as more and more lives are sucked into this vortex. And then at some point it comes to a head. And those are the old sins. And the shadows they cast oftentimes will be far beyond the comprehension of the person who actually committed the sin when they committed it, because nobody can understand the tentacles of all this over time. And, when you look in your crime fiction, you write about multi-generational stuff, years and decades. past. And these things get built up, and the decisions that are made in the past have an enormous effect on people. The decisions they make in turn themselves. And then it's almost like a replicating thing. It's like a virus going through your body. It just breeds and keeps rebreeding and keeps invading and killing and down the line. So I think that's one of the truest lines anybody could write, because it's history. You know, we don't have to question whether it happens or not. It has happened. It happens every day.
David, as individuals, not necessarily as societies in sort of the larger historical sense, but as individuals with reference to crime and crime fiction, do you think it's possible to walk away from your past? Is there such a thing as redemption?
Redemption is something I've written about in some of my novels. I even named one of my novels Redemption. Redemption is, it's difficult to earn, you know, because it's not a simple, you know, writing a check out. You know, I did $300 worth of bad, and here's $300 worth of good in return for that. There's just no way to sort of balance out the emotional impact of deeds done and then future deeds to rectify that. The only thing you can do with redemption is strive for it, you know, and if you hit it, you may not know it. Others may not grant it to you, regardless of what you tried to do. But I've always thought that if you made the decision to right a wrong that you did, that's worth something. And I think a lot of great stories have used that as a catalyst, as we've seen. You know, somebody's trying to make up for something they did in the past, and they may succeed, they may not succeed. They may make up, like, you know, 20% of the movies ever made and a lot of the books ever written too. So I think with a redemption, the only thing you can do is try. It's never going to be an equal sort of thing, and people may not recognize it. I think at the end of the day, the best you can do is recognize in yourself that you made a decision to try to redeem yourself for something you've done. And that in itself is really hard, because I found, particularly over the last 5 years, that the hardest thing for people to admit is that they were wrong. They just won't do it.
Yeah.
They just absolutely will not do it. And they will come up with every justification under the sun to prove that they actually weren't wrong, instead of just saying, wow, I was wrong.
Yeah, it's mind-boggling, isn't it? I don't understand it. Are we going to see more of Aloysius?
We are. I mean, I really, with this one, I gave him, you know, a little over 3 years between the last book and the chronology, to let him, you know, do a bunch of cases, work under Willie Dash, learn LA and Hollywood and everything about that town as much as he could. And now going forward, I think that things will accelerate. I felt like the writing between the first and the second was a step up. I think the writing between the second and the third and the storytelling was a step up. I found my voice with him. I found the character with him. I found that balance between trying to, you know, have evoking the time period and the town and the place, and having a balance with the plot and a balance with the character development too. I think I got a little bit better in Dreamtown than I was in the first 2 books with those things. And I'm just going to try to continue to, you know, again, every day, just try to get a little bit better at the craft. That's all we can all do. I mean, that's just it.
Absolutely. Well, I'm looking forward to seeing more of it. I don't know how I'm doing for time, so I want to ask this question so I don't run out of time. Could you tell us about the Wish You Well Foundation?
Yeah, the Wish You Well Foundation, my wife and I founded it about 20 years ago. When I first started out with my first novel, I went everywhere. Anybody invited me to any place, I went. You know, there's a 3-person book club in Nebraska. Hey, would you like to come? Yep, I'm on the next plane. I'll be there. You know, what's for dinner? So I got a crash course, because a lot of the programs I went to and events I was invited to were sponsored by Friends of the Library, local literacy organizations, and I got a crash course over a couple of years of how dire, you know, illiteracy is in this country, where you have half the adult population reading at the 2 lowest levels of literacy. You know, 25% of the population reading, you know, that are illiterate, and 25% who can't even read a grocery list. So the Wish You Well Foundation, I like to call us like an ATM and a network machine. We get about 5,000 to 6,000 grant applications a year from organizations all over the country. So we fund programs and initiatives and endeavors in pretty much all 50 states and counting. We have done so over the last 20 years. And have, you know, been part of helping millions of people learn to read at a higher level. And it's never been about reading a book on the beach. It's always been about how in the world can you be a viable participant in a democracy if you can't read and have a cognitive process at a high level. It's impossible. We live in an information age where we're inundated every day with, terabytes of information. And if you can't process that and go out and figure out your own sources to verify what you're hearing, then how do you know what to do with the ballot box? I mean, it's a disconnect. So our goal was always to make people, one, to allow them to be self-sustaining, get better jobs, earn more money, break their families out of the cycle of poverty, where if you're illiterate, the chances are almost 85% that your children will grow up in a climate of illiteracy, and that will propel itself down the road. So to break out of the cycle of poverty, but also to allow our country to become a more self-sustaining and better democracy because we have a more informed citizenry. We're certainly not there yet, but at the Wish-You-Well Foundation, our goal is to provide funds and to provide networking. So we now have sort of this national database, and so we have maybe one provider who is in one state and another provider in another state who do some similar things. One does A, one does B, and we try to hook them up so together they can do C, and to make them better and more efficient. So those are the things that we try to do with the Wish-You-Well organization, because look, to read and to think have always been, to me, the same verb. You can't do one without the other. So our goal is to make sure people can read at a high level, can think at a better level, and make better decisions.
And do you take donations?
We do take donations, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm intrigued by the painting behind you. What is that? And tell us about it.
It's on aluminum. This is I'm in Florida right now, but this painting was done by an artist in North Carolina, and I actually bought it in Virginia, in Southern Virginia, at a lake house we have. And it's a soothing thing for me. Our stories we write about are not ones that are relaxing to write about. So to have something that allows you to take a deep breath, not such a bad thing. I like the colors. I love that it's painted on aluminum too. So it's kind of pretty vivid there. So
it's fun. It's soothing me as I sit here. Barbara, do you have questions from the?
Yeah, I have a couple before we call Patrick up, or a couple of things I'd like to say. David, I found the first 5 pages of this book to be really an extraordinary dive as he's driving into Los Angeles from Bay City. You just did a remarkable job of setting the scenery. When I think about Chandler, there's a sentence Michael Connelly used to quote, something about, the jacarandas are in bloom again. And I think of that all the time. We have jacarandas here. And when I see them, I think Raymond Chandler. But you have a sentence that really, I thought was fabulous. To his mind, the LAPD was one of the biggest criminal enterprises in the world. Certainly a Don Winslow sentence. Don could have written that one too. But police corruption has been so much a part, especially on television, Line of Duty and things like that, where they have whole departments investigating, the rest of the force and all. What inspired you to throw that line into this book? It's only on page 2.
Yeah, and Don obviously knows this, around 1950, they hired a new guy named Bill Parker to be the LAPD, and he was from South Dakota, Deadwood, South Dakota. And he was a very religious guy, came from a very religious family. They moved to California. He worked his way up. He was a big alcoholic, died of a heart attack after getting an award like in 1966. And he cleaned up a good amount of LA. And I guess for people who were not people of color, he might have been a good thing. He was not known for being, he was quite a prejudiced person. But I wanted people to understand that in this novel, because later on you talk about foreshadowing and payoff, that, one reason Archer doesn't really run to the police every time he finds something is because, they're not his friend either. And you never know who's playing on whose side, because the money out there, the mob money and money from the studios, and was so extraordinary, far more than any government could pay, that anybody could be bought. So as a PI back then, You really had to rely on yourself, which also made it interesting because it's so much better to have a hero who doesn't rely on an army to help him. He just has to rely on his own wits and his own guts, and and the revolver he has in his shoulder holster. So I'm going to let people know early on that this was not going to be a buddy film. This is not going to be the PIs working with the cops to try to solve this thing. This is going to be one guy pushing against the mountain.
Right. Well, you socked it right to us right out there. Now we've only moved to page 8 for my next question there. Liberty Callahan, who is the woman that Archer is there to visit, spend New Year's Eve with, as 1952 segues to 1953. I thought you did a wonderful job. I mean, this is a phenomenal era in Hollywood. And just in a couple lines here, you do remind us of all the great things that were going on. When she says, I did have a decent role in High Noon with Coop, but I did a screen test for The Quiet Man, but didn't make the cut. And then Hitchcock is going to be filming Dial M for Murder in the summer. It's based on a play, but then he might direct another picture called Rear Window. And I thought, wow, just in 2 paragraphs, I mean, these are iconic movies, that we think about. And you really reminded us of how phenomenal in Hollywood this particular year was.
Yeah, the 19.
Not that there anything else here. Did I freeze?
Just for a minute, but now you're back.
Now you're back. Yeah.
Again, the 1950s. If you go back and look at the number of movies, iconic movies that were done during that time period, and the stars that were in them, is absolutely phenomenal. When I wrote those lines, I mean, I had to go back and research and see when these movies came out, when they were shooting, when they were being thought about, being made into movies. And it was in that sort of very narrow box. It was within like a year, 11 months to 13 months. All these movies were done, or were going to be made. And it was all about. And I have to tell you, the first draft of those first couple of chapters were a lot longer because you got all this research and you're trying to put it in and you're trying to figure, okay, I know I'm going to have to cut a bunch of this stuff out, but let me just put it out there, see what works the best, and then I trimmed, those first 3 chapters were probably 40 pages and they trimmed them down to 9 or 10 and left the essential elements in. All I'm trying to do is evoke a time period and let you know that you're not in 2022, you're in a different place, time and place, and just hang on for the ride and just keep that in mind.
Well, whatever these people are up to, it was an extraordinarily productive and creative time.
It absolutely was.
1939 is like one of those iconic years, isn't it, Don?
Yeah.
Trying to think back, wasn't that another year where Gone with the Wind and maybe I'm thinking of books.
Wizard of Oz, Gone with the Wind. Yep. We're 1939, along with some others.
Hey, David, speaking of movies, we're going to do a crime film festival over the weekend. What do you throw into it?
Oh, God. Well, you got to have the two essentials will be Chinatown and The Big Sleep. I think what film festival about crime do you not have? 39 Steps will be another one. Mm-hmm. When you watch, I remember I was trying to get my son to watch Chinatown with me about a couple of years ago. He's now 26, and he's not a big Humphrey Bogart fan, but I said I was also trying to get him to watch The Big Sleep. So The Big Sleep, we got 10, 15 minutes into the movie. And he goes, Dad, I can't watch this. This guy is a total chauvinist pig. He's calling women baby, and sugar and sweetheart. And he's condescending and patronizing, and I don't like him. This is just, I said, son, I'm so proud of you. You are a 21st century man and 21st century sensibilities. But I said, if you can just get past that for like an hour and 40 minutes, it's a really terrific film.
Yeah.
So obviously give me a little bit of time and I could think of many others, but The Drowning Pool, you go back to Ross McDonald, The Drowning Pool with Paul Newman. And I think look, we can call it crime fiction. I would prefer to call it life. We've all done crap in our lives. It may not be criminal, but it was probably bad. was probably something we regret. People do bad stuff all the time, intentionally, unintentionally. It just shows the darker side of life. It shows the consequences of actions. So it really is just about life. And the Big Sleep, it's about rich people doing stupid stuff, trying to cover it up. And you got a PI who gets thrown into the middle of it, trying to clean up this mess for whatever reason, because he has ethics and wants to do the right thing. And at the end of the day, bad people to get punished. Not all of them. The person who probably should have gotten punished got off with a light slap. Why? Because they were wealthy. That's real life, people.
Mm-hmm.
There are no billionaires on death row. Guess why?
Right.
They got great lawyers. That's why.
Yep.
So I think that, crime fiction and crime festivals, you watch those movies, you read the books, all you're reading about is life.
So I have one question for Don. I want to know how you answered, Don, your own in the Italian essay. What was your position?
Very similar to David's, probably not coincidentally, that yes, I think crime fiction is literature, and no, it doesn't matter to me at all. And
so that being, I find it interesting that much of the promotion for City of Fire, you talk about writing a modern Iliad.
Yeah.
Do you think that people will even know what that means?
I don't know. I really don't. I'll find out, I guess, over the next few weeks, But this whole trilogy is based on the Iliad, the Aeneid, the Odyssey, and Greek tragic dramas. Every character has an analogous character in those works, and we'll see how it goes.
You know what? Shakespeare did really great with that.
Yeah, he did all right.
He did all right, didn't he?
He did okay. Yeah.
Like 12, I think when I was talking with Goldman, he said there are like 12 original ideas and everything else is just derived from those.
I'm absolutely sure that's true. And you read Aeschylus, you read the Orestes cycle, it's noir fiction, guy gets murdered in his bathtub by his wife and his wife's lover, and it goes from there, so it could be shot in black and white, I think.
Let's call Patrick up and see what comments and questions he'd like to introduce into this.
Okay.
Sure. Yeah, you both have a lot of fans watching on YouTube and Facebook, and they're asking some great questions. And I'm going to start with one from Candace, which is one of the best questions I've heard, and you don't hear this very often. Does your mood or your state of mind while writing have an effect on the book's content? Start with David.
Yes, yeah, absolutely does. I mean, we're only human. And sometimes it can be a good thing. Sometimes it can be a bad thing. I've been on both sides of that where, I wrote a book years ago called Last Man Standing. And when I finished the draft and sent it up to people who read, give me some constructive criticism and feedback. And they were all like, God, this is just not you. What's going on? And I was at a time in my life where a really important family member was going through an incredibly difficult time. And I'd gotten sort of sucked into that because of what my prior profession was. And that bled into my writing, and not in a good way. And, that was 110,000 words down the toilet that I had to, refashion and rebuild into another novel. But sometimes a mood can actually be, the genesis of some really good writing too. I think as you do this more, you maybe get a little more adept, hopefully, about which is which, and you push back against the negative stuff and get your head clear, or you use something that can actually make the writing more vivid.
How about you, Don?
Yeah, definitely it affects it. There are times when I'll write something of an afternoon and it's great. And then I come back in the morning and I look at it and go, what were you thinking? You were in a lousy mood, but also there are times I'll try to trigger a mood. If I know I have a really angry scene coming up, I'll pump myself up. I'll play blasting hip hop. I'll get really mad. Or similarly, if it's a softer kind of scene, I can do that. But I think it's a matter, and as David alluded to, of knowing yourself well enough, to go, oh man, I was in a certain kind of mood when I wrote that, and I should rewrite it, or hit delete.
Let's see here. There's a viewer named Stefania from Italy who's asked a number of questions. I'll pick a few of them. She's interested, David, you mentioned thesaurus just kind of in passing, but she wants to know, do you use a dictionary or do you have one close at hand while you're writing?
Yeah, I mean, I think every writer has, E.B. White and a dictionary and a thesaurus and all that. I can't say that I used them a whole lot. I'm not one who tries to go out of my way to find words that I haven't used before, just to make the writing look somehow more, elegant or more intelligent or whatever. I've always thought that, short, concise, declarative sentences work pretty well. I'm not trying to show people that I'm something that I'm not. When I was a lawyer, I was a wordsmith. And the only quivers and arrows in my quiver were words. As a lawyer, I would build stories. As Don alluded to earlier, it's just about telling a story as a lawyer. But if I'm overusing a word and I would like to see a alternate word, will I pick up a thesaurus and thumb through it? Absolutely. You have spell check now, so dictionaries are not the tool they used to be because it's built into your computer. It all depends on, you have to ask yourself, is it right for the story? Am I doing it for me, for an ego thing? If it is, forget it. Don't even go there, because there's no point to it. If it's something that the story deserves or demands or requires to make it a better story, then yeah, I just think that keep your motivation simple, and what you're writing is a story. So is it right for the story? Does it make the story better? When you're doing research, my three little telltales is that, does it tell the reader information they need to follow the story? Does it flesh out a character better? Does it move the plot forward? If it doesn't do one of those three things, one or more of those three things, then why is it in the novel? And the same goes with, searching for words. If you're searching for words to make yourself look smarter, what's the point of that? And you've gotten away from why you're writing a novel in the first place.
Seems like most writers have pet words that they use maybe subconsciously over and over. Yeah,
They do.
Let's see, Stefania, she would also like to ask, David, have your Italian origins influenced your life or your writing? Do you feel connected to my country in some way?
I absolutely do. I mean, I've been to Italy many times. I've been to the little village Barga in Tuscany where my grandfather was born and grew up. I had big families on both sides. I don't know how many, I lost count of the number of aunts and uncles that I have, 10 on one side and 10 kids on one side and 10 kids on the other side. And so in my novels, family is an important element in the stories that I write about. And I write about women a lot in my novels. I've never written about damsel in distress in my life because I've never met one, quite frankly. And I write about strong, independent women because that's all I grew up with. Both my grandmothers I grew up with. My mother was a force of nature. My sister as well. She was a journalist. My wife is quite independent and strong, and we raised a daughter the same. But I think that really was borne out by the intertwined families that I grew up with of Italian heritage. Because family, there's nothing more important in that culture. Even wine and pasta take a little bit of a backseat to that. And so those are important elements, and that really does come from my ethnic background.
Right. There's a question from YouTube. Somebody would like to know, Don, how much research goes into a book like Power of the Dog?
Power of the Dog, which was a book about the origins of the Mexican drug cartels, took me 6 years to write. And at least 3, maybe 3.5 of those years was just research. So tons. I typically start off with history because I'm a big believer in history as important, even if you don't use it, as David was saying, use very little of this stuff, but if it will inform the reader and inform me, then I go to journalism, then I go to documents, legal trial transcripts, FBI, CIA redacted reports, that kind of stuff. When I feel that I have enough base knowledge, then I go out and talk to people, and network, and someone will tell you, let you speak with someone else, or let you speak with someone else. I never do that, though, until I feel I have a grasp of the basic facts, so I'm not wasting people's time. What I'm interested in is really what they think and what they feel more than what they did. So yeah, a book like Dog, it was years and years.
Wow. And let's see, here's a question for both of you. Do you ever write yourself into a corner? And how do you back out of it?
I think that's a great exercise to write yourself into a corner, and that forces you to be creative. I went back to my old high school years and years ago, and I did a little creative writing class with the students there, and I gave them an exercise. I said, "Here's a newspaper, Richmond Times-Dispatch. Here's a story on the front page. Pick one. Here's the stories on the back page. Pick one. Now write a story combining those two stories together in a plausible fashion." And all of a sudden you realize that you can be creative in linking those two totally different, separate stories together, but you have to find the inner workings that can bring them together, interlace them together. And all of a sudden, those are fundamental building blocks of plot, and for me, I write myself into a corner all the time. I don't outline the books. I can't. I've tried to outline the books from A to Z, but then it just becomes a sludge. It's like I look at the outline. What am I supposed to write today? Oh, paragraph A4C. That's exciting for me. It's a journey for me. I want to know what's going to happen too. I don't want to know the ending. Then it's like I'm just typing to the end. And what's fun about that? Where's the inspiration? Where's the revelation? Where's the epiphany in any of that? So for me, I want to write myself into a corner, and then I want to write myself out of the corner. And that just forces you to be a little more clever than you thought you were going to have to be. And I feel like writing an outline, and I do little mini MINI outlines for a chapter here or there. But I've always felt like writing an outline is not writing a novel. There's no urgency, there's no tension. It's the difference between drawing up a battle plan and actually fighting in the battle, because the battle plan is out the window because you can't think of everything that's going to happen in an actual battle. You can take a few of these tendencies, but you're going to have to come up with a bunch of stuff on your own, seat of your pants. And I think that's where the best stuff comes from. I've read books where things are so neatly tied up and everything is nicely dovetailed that you just feel like, this was an outline book. It was just, there's nothing that just rips you. You just sort of see it coming. But I also, here's the caveat to that works for me. There are lots of writers out there who do terrific work, who use outlines throughout the whole book, and God bless them. You just have to find a process that works for you. And it's different for everybody. And over the course of your career, hey, guess what? Your process may change. And there's nothing wrong with that. If it works for you, do it.
Yeah, Don, with these sort of big, epic, grand scope novels that you've written, how do you kind of manage the material, and do you have like a broad outline or?
No. No, I David, really, we're in complete accord about this. Picking up on his battle analogy, it's axiomatic, and that, my education was in military history, that no battle plan survives first contact with the enemy. So chapter 1, that outline, if you have it, can go out the window. And like David, I like to be surprised. And I feel that if I paint my character into a corner, the reader comes with us, right? The reader's in that corner too, and the reader feels that tension and that, what do we do now kind of feeling. So I completely agree. I want to be surprised, and I want to leave the possibility of surprise open. Because sometimes, I don't know if David experiences this, I think he probably does, characters will do and say things you didn't plan. And it might take the book or the chapter into a new and better and interesting direction.
Yeah, absolutely right. And that's another reason why going from an outline, because I really don't know my character until I've written, 50, 60, 100 pages. I don't know what they're capable of. And I don't get that from an outline. I just don't. It's the difference between, reading a book about how to drive a Formula One car or actually driving the damn car and see what happens, and that thrill, that tension, that urgency, that in the moment kind of thing you don't get from the outline. And I totally agree with Don. Look, if you, the writer who is in total command of the material, at least, you know what you're writing about. If you are in the corner wondering how the hell am I going to get out of here? What do you think the reader's doing? The reader's going ballistic. They're like, holy shit. What is this? I never saw this coming. And why is that such a bad thing? That's why they call them mystery thrillers.
And one of the great things to do is to leave the reader in the corner and then move to a different chapter on the next page. It's like, you're in the corner, you're going to stay there for 10 or 15 pages, and then we'll come back.
That's right. We'll be back at some point. Just
it's a cheap trick, but it's ours.
Let's see. We have a viewer named Christy who says, my bonus mom, which I like, and a few friends and I started reading your books at the beginning of the pandemic together. And she just says, thank you so much for the welcome distraction that your books have provided, especially these last few years.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I see that, and books have been a welcome distraction for me. I've read a lot of books in the last 2.5 years, and apart from the books, my own books that I write, I've been diving to a lot of books just to learn stuff, be motivated, get excited, get a little more optimistic, but also just as a distraction, to get away from all this stuff for a little while at least. Keeps you sane.
Let's see. Maybe a final question for both of you. What are some of your favorite novels? I'm paraphrasing slightly, but what are some of the books that you kind of go back to again and again for inspiration?
For me, one of my favorite writers when I was in high school and college was John Irving, and still one of my favorite writers. And he writes these big generational sweeping epics that takes on really serious issues, like Inside Our House Rules, abortion, but does it with humor and grace. He's kind of like the Mark Twain of his generation, I always thought. And I will go back to his work, and because it moves me, and it makes me want to be a better writer. I can never be a John Irving writer. I'm just not who I am. You have to be who you are as a writer. I'm a big Mark Twain fan. I go back and read Mark Twain stuff a lot. The language, you can disagree or agree about his plotting and his stories, but the language is just so visceral and American that I really get a lot out of that. But I also cut my teeth on crime novels. I still go back and read Conan Doyle. Not just people. What people don't realize about Conan Doyle is he was an incredible horror writer. Round the Fire is a collection of short stories. It's almost like over 1,000 pages. Some of the best horror and sci-fi fiction I've ever read, which just shows the guy's diversity and talent. And I'll go back and read that because I love short stories. I was a big Raymond Carver fan, Dora Welty fan, Flannery O'Connor, and I always appreciated the art of the short story. And that really moves me because I spend so much of my time both reading and trying to write them as well. But any book, and I've read a lot of books in my life. A lot of them are memorable. A lot of them I go back to. When I'm writing the Archer series, I'm always picking up, a Chandler or looking at Elroy or MacDonald, just to look at the brilliance of their prose and the complexity of their plotting and the humanity of what they write about. Because I want to do those things too. And I want to have that same feel in my novels. And it's just nice to know that others have come before you who have accomplished it. So it gives you a sense that, if I keep working hard, I can get close to that level and write something that's worth reading.
How about you, Don?
I'm going to have a sore neck after this session from nodding so much at what David's been saying. So thanks a lot, David. Yeah, I also, of course, go back to the crime, or as David would say, the life greats that he mentioned, always inspiring. I'm never going to write anything nearly as good as Raymond Chandler, but you want to try. I go back to Tolstoy. I read War and Peace every few years because this is a huge novel that talked about enormous issues and big sweeping scenes, but also the tiniest and most intimate sort of scenes. War and Peace begins at a tea party, but then also can do the Battle of Borodino and huge, huge issues. And I go back to Shakespeare all the time. There are times, if I'm a little tired on a Sunday afternoon and it's raining, I'll just pick up the collected works, open it at random, and read a few pages, and it's always wonderful.
I wrote my Mercy book is about two twins. The Atlee Pine series is about two twins. So I've read several works of Shakespeare, particularly
Mhm.
Twelfth Night, because
Yeah.
Shakespeare loved twins.
Yes, he did. Great
And,
plot devices. Yeah.
they're great plot devices. But yeah, everything Don said, I echo as well. It's just, and I love when you talk about the intimate scenes in War and Peace and the big. I've always felt as a novelist that the big scenes take care of themselves. Your energy
Mhm.
level is high, just the act of it. But what makes a novel worth reading and ties all of the stuff together are the intimate human scenes. If you don't have those, if you just have wham bam throughout and nothing else,
Yeah.
nobody's going to care about that.
Yeah.
It's the small scenes where you really need, both in books and in film, it's the small scenes that make the story. And if
Absolutely.
you ignore those, at your peril.
What's the scene we most remember about Jaws? It's the three of them on the boat talking.
That's right. That's right.
The Indianapolis talking about that. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I'm thinking about Shakespeare and cross-dressing. One of the reasons he loved twins. I'm serious. One of the reasons he loved twins.
I didn't know if there was a comma in there, or you were.
No, it's just it gave you so many opportunities. It's kind of like, Delaclos took that forward with Les Liaisons Dangereuses, where, it's so gender fluid because the clothes cover it all up and you can do all these amazing things. Wow.
And what also was so tricky about it, of course, it was men playing women in Shakespeare's time.
It absolutely was.
So it was men playing women playing men.
Men.
So when this is
Very
over,
confusing, I think.
I have homework for both of you. When this is over,
no.
you take a dictionary, go look up the word merkin, MERKIN in the OED. I'm not going into what it is. Right
No, I'm
here,
not going to go into what
but
it
it's
is either. And
it's
I'm
a
ashamed of you.
Shakespearean word that will sum up what we're just talking about. You're
I
gonna
know
love it.
exactly what it
I always-
means.
I always
Shame
thought
on
it-
you.
I always thought a good bumper sticker would be proud to be a Merkin.
It wasn't a person, Patrick. It was not a person.
I know exactly what it is, Barb.
I know. Well, anyway, Dreamtown, we already know what Don is doing because next week, City of Fire begins. And in fact, Don will be at the Poison Pen, yay, on Monday with Patrick to talk about it. And David, we know that Dreamtown is your book, in fact, publishes today. So
Yes.
felicitations again.
Thank
And
you.
I know I remember seeing an October book, but you said, am I missing a book this year? What do we
Yeah,
do?
so the book in July is called The 620 Man.
Aha.
It's a thriller set in New York City. And the 620 is a train he takes into Manhattan every day from Mount Kisco. So it's yeah, and then the book in the fall is an Amos Decker, My Memory Man.
Great.
Wonderful. Well, what a treat for all of you to know. that you
Hey,
have
Don, I'm
two
looking forward to seeing you in DC.
Yeah, I am
Yeah.
too, man. It'll be great to meet in person, and I'm
Same
really
here.
looking forward to it. Yeah, yeah, good.
Same here. Thanks again for doing this. I really.
Oh
it
boy,
was an
thanks for
honor.
thanks for asking me. What an honor and what a pleasure.
Are you guys
Same-
doing an event together in DC?
same.
We are.
That's
We are.
great.
Yep.
How
Yep.
cool.
Well, it's been an electrifying conversation, guys. I'm reading so much about writing as well as reading and about history and just, I mean, this is a marvelous, marvelous hour. I can't thank you both enough. So good night, everybody. Thank you
Okay,
very much
thanks.
for
Good night.
joining us.
Good night,
Enjoy-
everybody.
Both of you enjoy your publication weeks.